Welcome to the Strength Athlete Podcast, episode number 29. We are very excited to kind of get back into the swing of creating and putting out these podcasts for you guys, by no fault of any individual, but probably primarily me for, scheduling issues. It's been a bit of a challenge for us to create these, but fact of the matter is you guys don't care about that. You want to hear podcasts and we want to make them because we want to provide info for you. Before we get into today's subject, couple things to talk about. Actually, there's some fun stuff. First and foremost, shout out to SBD-USA, the sponsor of the Strength Athlete Podcast. Check them out at SBD-USA.com. One small note with regards to that, and I've gotten a lot of questions about this. We no longer have a free shipping code. Unfortunately, SBD-USA has done away with coupon codes of all kinds, and that it does not mean that our partnership has been dissolved. We do still want to support them. We would still encourage you to support them as the makers of arguably the best equipment in the powerlifting industry. But, you're going to have to pay for shipping now, which I'm so sorry about, but it's just the way that it's going to be.
There's some good stuff coming out from them. I'm very excited for late 2019, 2020 for SBD. So keep your eyes peeled.
You can't tease us like that, Bryce.
Oh, that's my job.
Professional tease, casual coach, professional tease. But in terms of upcoming podcasts, we actually have an episode forthcoming with Paul Ingraham, who is going to talk with us about pain science and how that relates to training and maybe some of the takeaways that you can utilize with regards to that. And going from there, I just wanted to talk a little bit about a few of the new kind of free things that we've put out for you guys. Historically, we, the Strength Athlete as a brand, have made an effort to create a lot of free stuff. And recently we have released a few new items, I guess you could say, in terms of a beginner program, which I'll have Bryce and Joe talk about shortly, and a revised version of the intermediate program that Eric and I put together, and the weekly emails that are awesome and being very well received by, I think, in the mid thousands of people right now. Somewhere between 1,000 to 2,000 people are getting these emails a week, and feedback has been very, very positive. So Bryce, Joe, why don't you guys tell us a little bit about the beginner program?
Yeah, so we had an intermediate program for a long time and just kind of felt like there was nothing really powerlifting specific for the new powerlifter besides like a basic 5x5 or even a 5-3-1 progression. Kind of assumes that you already have good data on 1 rep maxes and just are ready to train like that, and even there, like, there's a little too much focus on overhead pressing in the traditional version of that. So kind of felt like there was a need to put something out that was evidence-based and kind of reflected the way that we would train beginner athletes. So Joe and I put our heads together on a training approach for athletes that we feel really confident about. There's plenty of just kind of generalized hypertrophy work, in addition to some low reps and a good amount of training volume on the competition squat, bench, and deadlift.
Yeah, I think one other thing that we really wanted to address was also the fact that there are no beginner approaches that are specifically designed for females. So we came out and made this program accessible as far as the gender differences between lifters. So we made it possible for you to run it optimally as a male or a female, as well as make it possible for you to use it for a competition prep, should you so choose, or you can just use it as a general 9-week program. So it's very cool. You can switch it between a competition mode and a non-competition mode and just run it over and over until you get sick of it. It's really an excellent program. It covers all the bases that you could possibly want as a beginner, and honestly, I'm just very excited that it's been out in the world as long as it has. Hopefully, this gets it in more people's hands who are thinking about picking up the sport.
Nice. Yeah, so we had a good amount of kind of exercise variation, and even some different choices, like on chest movements, depending on what equipment you have available. Used a combination of auto-regulation and percentage-based approaches because beginner athletes progress at such different rates. Like, how do you factor that into making a training approach for everyone? And we kind of just needed a blend of both auto-regulation and some percentage-based stuff. So just like Joe, we're really excited for people to use it.
Can you guys tell us a little bit about, what the gender differences look like in terms of the male versus female setting on the program?
Joe, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So generally speaking, if you just look at the physiological differences between females and males. They can typically handle a higher amount of sets and reps at a given intensity, especially as you approach the 90% range. Then it tends to drop off a little bit. So we took that into account when we were designing the program. So on average, it's about, at least in terms of intensity, it's about 2 to 3% higher, and there's one extra set or rep in there if you switch it into female mode. And the idea behind that is just generally because of that physiological difference.
So in short, you could say that women tolerate training volume better than men, and so you give them a little more.
Yep, exactly.
Nice. You guys have anything else to add about that beginner program? Any little tidbits?
It also has some of the other kind of spreadsheet improvements that we've made over time. So if you're looking at it, just check out the reference page too. There's some really good info on goal setting, some basic sports psychology, some warm-up stuff. We know a lot of times that powerlifters are a little bit in the dark having started the sport. It's not only the programming you need to figure out, but it's how do I get ready for my training? What are even reasonable goals? So check that stuff out too.
Yeah, and there's also a little bit of room for you to choose the things that you enjoy. I think that was one thing that was big for Bryce and I, is making sure that people could customize this program in all of the ways that one should, just so that they can enjoy it and still achieve their goals. So there's even room in there for you to pick a movement of your choice to progress through the entire program. Like Bryce said before, there's a ton of different options as far as the individual accessory movements. I really do think that a lot of people will enjoy it if they haven't picked up the sport and are looking to get into it.
Eric, you look like you were going to say something a second ago.
I was going to make a joke, but I was going to just touch on some of the updates that we made to the intermediate program. And so the original program that Hanny and I worked on was more geared towards an off-season approach, working towards some new rep maxes on squat, bench, and deadlift, as well as some accessory lifts. And the updated program takes some of the principles that worked well in the intermediate program, because we've seen a pretty strong track record of success with that program, but we've updated the new 2.0 version of it to be a little bit more geared towards competition prep, so more singles practice and culminating in one final meet day rather than a full week of gym testing in the original program.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of the way we changed it. In terms of nuts and bolts, I think what we largely did was actually gave a little bit more volume, which is kind of counterintuitive for what you would anticipate in a meet prep program by traditional standards. But when you're doing things right, that's what they look like. And, so the volume's a little bit higher. The average intensity is a little bit higher. So it's almost like if you were talking about male versus female differences, it's like we have some extra intensity, some extra volume throughout the duration of this program that's going to push you just a little bit harder. It's like the gas pedal's a little closer to being all the way down, not really all the way to the floor, but it's certainly a little bit further down. So if you're looking for something to try out to run leading into a competition that's a little bit higher frequency, if you're fairly injury resilient and you fall into that moderate strength rep range, let's say that if you're still using the Wilks score as your determinant of how strong you are, if you're like 375 plus, then that's probably a good place to start in terms of what you would want to do going forward. People are, everyone wants to run the shiny new version of things, but the 1.0 version also has been tremendously successful. People have been loving that program since we put it out. And I really do believe that, these are a few of the best free programs out there on the internet in terms of what you can get your hands on without having to pay a dime. But please do read the directions on the Start Here tab. I can't tell you how many emails I get from people telling me that the spreadsheet that a couple thousand other people have used isn't working right. It's not the spreadsheet, it's you. Read the directions. The spreadsheets work. So having said that, check those out. And let's talk a little bit about those weekly emails, Bryce. I keep hearing how awesome they are from multiple different people, both TSA clients and non-TSA clients alike, because this resource is available to everybody. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
So there are a lot of conversations that we have with our athletes on a weekly basis that just never see the light of day outside of those individual one-on-one conversations. Someone opens up about a deeply personal issue about goal setting or about motivation or loss of confidence or anxiety or, nutrition, or, it can be data-based inside the realm of sports psychology, outside, it can be training focused. The point is that, we kind of have these really, really good conversations, but the buck stops there, and I feel like that's a shame. I wanted more people to kind of get in on some of those conversations. So I created this series of weekly emails that are kind of designed to teach you something and then give you some homework to work on. So it's a little bit of exposition and then some action steps about what do I do with this information. And it's designed to kind of work with your coaching. It doesn't have to be with TSA. If you're working with another coach, there's just language in there to use this stuff with your coach or goal setting or something like that. I just want to improve athletes on the whole. There's topics about burnout and focus and, coping strategies and resilience and just a range of other really cool topics that I think will just make powerlifters and sport athletes in general better. So they're free. They're kind of sequenced in an order that starts off with easier topics and works into more nuanced topics, kind of covering bases first. And you can sign up for that for free at thestrengthathlete.com/APT for Athletes Performance Toolkit.
And to add on to that, for all of the freebie programs that we put out for our free attempt selection sheet, which we'll be getting a refresh here soon, you can just get pretty much any of that at thestrengthathlete.com/freebies, FREEBIES. So please do check all of those awesome resources out. We put those out there because we want you guys to use them. There's no obligation in terms of downloading any of those things. So check them out, but read the damn directions. And then with regards to clients, the Strength Athlete clients are getting a pretty cool update to their training spreadsheet here soon, getting it optimized for mobile, which we're pretty excited about. Bryce has been putting in some serious work on that in terms of display and being able to input and view your training on a cell phone, because that's been a bit of a challenge with spreadsheets for a long time. We've been struggling and stumbling through Excel and spreadsheets and Google Drive, and God, I don't even want to talk about Excel. I was so resistant to switching to Google Drive, like emotionally, and resisting change. And now that I'm here, I don't know how I ever was there, but definitely a really cool update, revision to our training spreadsheet that is already extremely comprehensive when it comes to, like Bryce said, a lot of things with relation to warm-ups, a lot of things with relation to sports psychology. There's all sorts of cool things in there, and you actually get access to a lot of those built into the reference tab on the free programs. So even if you just want to check that stuff out and you don't give a damn about the program, check out the reference tab on the free programs. Sweet. Did I miss anything, guys, in terms of cool free stuff?
No, I think you covered it.
I don't think so.
Attempt selection, beginner, intermediate 1.0, 2.0, and performance emails.
Yeah. Cool. Lots of free stuff. And, we're always trying to think of more. So if any of you guys can think of something that would be useful for larger groups of people and would not require hundreds of hours out of us, shoot us an email. Specifically, shoot Eric an email. Eric at thestrengthathlete.com. He'll be happy to help you out.
I did think of one thing we forgot. Bryce, your training vlog that you've been putting out pretty consistently.
That's
People
true.
should check that out too.
Yeah, once a week update on my training leading into Nationals prep, some fancy footage, and some voiceover commentary about all manner of things.
And really, really cool video titles and cover frames. Bryce has really been doing well with the clickbait lately.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. All right. So, talking about beginner programs and intermediate programs and meet preps kind of is a good segue into the subject, actually. And I get asked this all the time, both when it comes to new clients, non-clients, existing clients, random conversations that I have in the gym. When will I be ready to compete? Or, why would I want to compete at all is something that comes up a lot. And I guess, it's one of those things where you don't really understand it until you've joined the club, right? You don't really appreciate what goes on at a powerlifting meet. And when spectating them isn't exactly the most fun thing in the world, particularly since most of what you're going to see is the local level meets where it's, a lot of very casual lifting in terms of not seeing the stars. You're not going to see Ray Williams at your local city meet. But, there's a lot of barriers emotionally and mentally to getting onto the platform for the first time, and I think that holds a lot of athletes back from really appreciating what powerlifting can be. And I say this from the perspective of a longtime competitor. I've having competed in powerlifting my first time about 11 years ago now. I can say without a doubt it completely changed the direction of my life. And I'm not saying that's going to happen to everybody else, but there's certainly I would say more reasons to go for it than reasons to resist it. And I think that, the biggest barrier that people bring up is, I don't feel like I'm strong enough to compete. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I think people feel like they have to hit a certain standard level of strength before they feel ready to compete. Maybe it's the social media lens, and they look around and they see all these other people like, oh wow, they're so strong, I could never do that, and think, well, I'm just not ready.
It tends to be people that are kind of tied to the Americanized pound numbers, like I need to be able to do 225, 315, 405, whatever it is, before I'm ready to get on the platform.
Yeah, and I think training in commercial gyms and seeing really strong people, or training in powerlifting gyms even, right? Because, I've had this conversation with people who are training in sport performance gyms, and, when they go into the gym and they're squatting next to the guy that's warming up with 495, or was squatting, if they happen to follow Amanda Lawrence on Instagram and they see that she's repping 500 pounds plus on her squats, they think, wow, how am I, who am I to step on the platform? And you know what, I'll tell you what, having been in the sport over a decade, I feel the same way, but that doesn't stop me. It's all about perspective, and powerlifting isn't really at almost all levels. It's not really a 1 versus 1 sport. It's not, you're not necessarily competing directly with one other person, and what this other person can do shouldn't necessarily influence whether or not you choose to compete. And I think that gets kind of lost, right? It takes time to build up to that. There's a certain skill associated with actually getting onto the platform. And, I think that that's something that grows over time, and it helps to motivate your training.
I would really say, I think it has to do with framing. And for all these people that are kind of thinking about it, their frame of whether they succeed or fail is the frame of comparing themselves versus others. And if you can keep the framing on yourself versus your own progress and your ability to progress, it literally doesn't matter if you are brand new or if you're a seasoned competitor. Are you making progress? Yes or no? Are you enjoying things? Yes or no? That's the kind of framing that we're really interested in. I think in that lens, everyone can enjoy powerlifting.
Yeah, I was just having this conversation with one of my athletes yesterday, so it's perfect that we're doing this podcast now. I can send it his way. He really just asked me, I feel like I'm going to need 2 years to compete. And that went into me recording maybe a 20-minute long check-in reply for him, just going into, what the process is like coming up to it. And honestly, I think that the biggest barrier for a lot of people just seems to be that they never feel like they're going to be strong enough. And the thing is that that's kind of how powerlifting is. It's a sport where we're constantly striving after progression, where we quite literally are never strong enough. And I think if you just come in with that mentality, it's just, it's never going to be the right time to compete. So hopefully we can get into some more details about how to actually figure that out for somebody.
I mean, if anything, it'd probably be more rewarding to compete early and often as a newer lifter, because you're able to see those numbers going up from meet to meet, and that's a rewarding process in itself. You might want to slow it down as things start to slow down in training, but early on in your first few competitive years, you can probably make pretty rapid progress from competition to competition.
Yeah, Eric, that's a good point. I feel like a lot of people may kind of associate a fear with competition, but if you turn that into something that is motivating, that every time you step on the platform, it's an exciting experience, you've learned something new, you've hit a PR, that's really rewarding. It's going to make you want to do that kind of thing again.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues that we face is that a lot of powerlifters come from non-athletic backgrounds, and so a lot of them haven't really had exposure to the concept that you don't have to win for sports to be fun. And I think, obviously winning is awesome. Everybody wants to win, but the fact of the matter is, if you're going to go compete at Raw Nationals, there's 128 people in your class, there will only be one winner. That means there are 127 Ricky Bobby definition losers, and if you're not in first, you're last, right? And so do you think that they are all going home and pouting about the fact that they lost? No, they're using this as an opportunity to progress, to participate in the social environment that is the high-level meets. When you go to these higher-level meets, you go to USAPL Raw Nationals, you go to USPA Nationals, you go to IPL Worlds, you go to IPF Worlds, you go to regionals, you go to the Arnold. These are all not only high level competitions, these are all like social gatherings almost of a circle of people that all get together and have a good time and live together, and it kind of becomes like a family. And that's kind of been the biggest revelation that I've had about powerlifting, is that it's about so much more than just the lifting. And maybe my perspective has shifted having been coaching for so long now, but it's certainly, there's so much more to it.
It has to be. It can't just be about the numbers, because that's not the kind of thing that's going to drive you for very long. It has to be about some kind of mastery or some deeper meaning for doing all this, you know? And like, I just briefly want to talk about one of the other reasons that people might, you know, want to not compete. You mentioned nationals. Like, as big as nationals is this year, like, it represents the top 6% of all USA powerlifting athletes that are going to nationals this year. And that's just a huge amount of athletes who aren't going, which is expected, you know? But at the same time, just getting there shouldn't be the goal. You know, the goal is just kind of enjoying yourself and spending your time getting stronger for its own sake, I think.
Not to take away from getting there, though. That's these days with the qualification standards going up, and inevitably they're going to get raised again, and probably again the year after that, right? Because they keep raising them, and the number of people who register for the meet keeps going up, which, you know, is awesome. But eventually 5-day, 5-platform meets are going to have to be a thing of the past, because they just sent out the email about that. And number one, that's a freaking impossible meet basically to run, and number two, it's just too big. Mm-hmm. But like I said, it's all part of that experience, and I think getting there and participating in that, and, you know, joining the big show, as it were, is a great avenue to participate. I think it's, you know, in time it's probably going to head more the direction of the Arnold's, not being that small, but being, you know, it's like the first however many people who fit into the qualification standards that sign up are able to get in, and that's my expectation of where it has to end up, right? And because if they just raise the qualification standards so that only the top 300 out of the 1,300 that registered could get into the meet, those are insanely high, and I think there would be some variability in terms of the number of people who could participate. But anyway, we're getting kind of off topic here. The point is, Raw Nationals, very cool. Competing, very cool. Understanding that it's about making your own progress and self-motivating and giving yourself something to work toward, very cool. So let's just say that we're past the strength barrier. You've accepted the fact that you know, you don't have to have particular numbers to compete, which, you know, I think is something that enough people can digest. That's not that hard. You know, the next thing that often comes up, and this is especially prevalent in new competitors, is I want to drop a weight class before I compete. Mm-hmm. And everybody, 10 out of 10 people, when I start a new client who's never competed before, like, all of them want to drop a weight class. And I don't know whether this is vanity and wanting to look better, which I totally get it, right? We all got into the gym because we want to look good naked. But like, why does that become how does that become a threshold for needing to compete? Why do you need to weigh 138 when you currently weigh 155? You're going to get weaker. So you know, how do you guys bridge that gap? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that sometimes that this just comes from a fact that it just comes back to comparing themselves. You know, they look at the numbers of the class that they would just settle into naturally, and they're like, oh, there's no way that I'm going to be able to compete. And again, I think that just kind of comes back to the way that people frame going and doing a competition. They want to win, they want to succeed, but people just don't realize that getting on the platform in the first place is a success. Not to mention that the whole point of training for that meet is to get stronger. But if you're going to drop a weight class, it's going to be much, much harder. It's not impossible, but it's definitely a lot harder. And I think that's just kind of where people, you know, especially when they're newer, when they're making a lot of gains very quickly, they don't realize that could definitely come to a halt if they try to drop so much weight.
I think, Joe, I think you're absolutely right. I just kind of wanted to add on, like, the mistake that people make a lot of times is to take their current strength level and to imagine how competitive that strength level would be in the lower weight class. Like, sure, if I could hit my current total in the 93s, like, I'd be great, you know, but it doesn't quite work that way.
You wouldn't be great in the 83s these days, though. Those 83s are like totaling as much as the 105s.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chad to interrupt your flow and toss that out there.
Yeah, I appreciate the jab to my self-confidence. No, just kidding. Yeah, it's just people mix that up a lot of times. And when you drop a weight class, especially a whole weight class, as a newer athlete, you're doing a lot of things to yourself, but the one thing you're doing is being delusional about your potential strength at the lower weight class. Eric, I think you were bridging off that point.
Yeah, I think that's sometimes tied to, especially more recently with the newer qualifying totals, people see that, well, if I drop 20 to 30 pounds and keep my strength, 100% of my strength, maybe I could qualify at this lower weight class, when, that might be harder than actually, adding the 100 or 200 pounds to their total that they would need in their current weight class.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a jab at me, Eric?
No. We get that all the time, so I'm not taking any shots.
Oh, yeah.
It does just so happen that in that volley of arrows, you are within the target range, though, Joe.
For sure.
No, but Eric's right, and this comes from Eric. I can add 100 pounds to your total bot horn. It's like and I'm it's happened. I've seen it happen a number of times, right? Of course, this is the age-old adage about powerlifting coaches and encouraging people to gain weight, right? And it's kind of become a running joke among my clientele that everybody ends up gaining weight. But the fact of the matter is, the goal, when you've competed enough times, the goal becomes strength, and the goal becomes to get to nationals, or the next goal becomes to get to the Arnold, and eventually, the Arnold is kind of the pinnacle for a lot of people, right? Because making a world team these days is not impossible, not impossible, but it is really a serious achievement, especially on the U.S. teams, right? There's no gimmies when it comes to winning a world spot in the U.S. All the way down to
that M4 spot, though.
Yeah. You guys can just wait it out, right? Based on attrition, you could get a spot if you wait till you're a Master 4. But even then, I think they said there's Eric. You were saying what was the name of the woman competing this past weekend? She was an 84, and Lori. She said there's 10. Yeah, Lori. She's an M2, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lori is an M2 84 kilo competitor, and there's 10 people in her class competing with her, or more than 10, probably somewhere under 20, I think, though, right?
Yeah. It's more than a full flight, though.
It's more than a full flight. It's more than 14 people competing for that one world spot, and that's in such an obscure, secluded M4 84 kilo or M2 84 kilo class. That's people who are between 50 and 59, by the way, for those of you who don't know the age categories. So it's extremely competitive. So getting to participate in that, from there making your way to the Arnold. I think the Arnold is kind of the ultimate goal for most competitors, and it should be, because it's an awesome meet, and Columbus is a lot of fun. I remember in a very early podcast that we did, I said that Columbus sucks, and what, being a couple Arnolds past that, and having a couple friends from Ohio now, I take that back. I actually really enjoy Columbus every time we go. I enjoy for everything except for the Arnold exposition. I don't want to go in there at all. But the powerlifting, the city, hot chicken takeover, there's a lot of things to really love about Columbus, Ohio. Anyway, Canes. We have Canes in California. Raising Canes is overrated massively.
Hey, just stay on this topic for a sec. I want to just wax poetic a little bit.
The topic of chicken, or what?
The topic of dropping a weight class. I just I have been in powerlifting for a while, and I feel like powerlifters still have a pretty unhealthy relationship with body weight. It's very much tied to a weight class, and still to sex appeal, and the fact that they want to look good. But anytime they go up a weight class, food quality oftentimes goes out the window, and it's just kind of eat whatever you want, junk food all the time and stuff like that. And that's just kind of leftover from 80s powerlifting habits of a cheeseburger and a milkshake after every training session, kind of calories don't matter, just more is better kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
I can really vibe with that.
I'm sure you can, but it's just there was no, maybe this is just a gross oversimplification, but I feel all the focus was on training and the right training and stuff like that, and nutrition was basically more is better, and if you lose weight, do water manipulation, and there was not really a whole lot of structure, and we're still struggling with getting out of that.
Bryce, I actually really agree with you there, man. I think that for some reason, it just seems to be like an all or nothing mentality. It's just like, if you're trying to stay in this weight class, I'm going to be as strict as possible all the time. And then it's just like, as soon as somebody says, hey, I think I'm going to go up to this next weight class, it's like eating out every single day, every meal, drinking a ton of calories, like just, it's definitely an all or none mentality. And I think that gap still needs to be bridged for a lot of individuals when they do think about going up a weight class.
Well, I think that stems from the fact that we restrict so aggressively. And, when it comes down to it, dieting is controlled starvation, right? That's what you're doing. You're limiting the amount of food so that your body eats itself, so that you get, shredded and look better naked. That's what dieting is. It's controlled starvation. And so for a lot of people, the obsession from the moment they get into the gym is that they want to lose weight, particularly in our Western American society or most Western European societies. Being overweight is extremely common, and getting into the gym and starting training and getting into weights, and by extension of that, ending up as a powerlifter or a CrossFitter or a weightlifter, your goal is to get strong and to get lean, and you have those goals concurrently. And as you get better, your goals may shift, and it may just go more and more towards getting strong. And so you start to think about gaining weight. So you've been restricting your diet so aggressively for so long in one of a number of different ways. And you turn around and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I get to gain weight. And so you go and you just eat your face off. Right. And I mean, I say this from a firsthand perspective, right? I lost a bunch of weight early on, and I went all the way down to competing at 181, and I was actually 181. I was walking around. I woke up the morning of my meet at 179, and we didn't do a water manipulation at all. I was extremely light. And then I turned around, and I remember Alberto Nunez was coaching me at the time. Turning around from that meet, he's like, you should probably go up a class or two. And I was like, done. And a month later, I was up that one class, and that was from like 179 to 198, and I had to cut to make 198 for my next meet. And so it's like you can't, it's hard to turn it off. For me personally, it's harder for me to eat in a controlled surplus than it is for me to diet. I have a really hard time mentally accepting the fact, like, okay, I can have these extra calories. I'm trying to gain weight. Awesome. But taking that extra 150 calorie surplus I'm aiming per day and not turning that into, well, it's the end of the day, I can eat whatever I want. Not ordering 3 orders of wings and a pizza from Domino's. Like, that's, it's hard to learn that. And I think that people don't really appreciate the amount of self-control that goes into a controlled surplus. I would say it actually requires more for a lot of people, particularly people who are seasoned in the Western style of eating. I think it takes more self-control to do that than it does to diet.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
I think the reason is, when you're dieting, there's a goal and there's a timeline and a deadline, and those kind of things can be motivating, and you can kind of, I don't know, I feel like you can identify, like, I am dieting, I am a dieter right now. So there's a little bit of identity associated with that, and maybe even some extra accountability from a few people who are kind of helping you get there or something like that. But when you're just in caloric surplus, it's just kind of like, I'm going up sooner or later, and the goal is somewhere between a half a pound to 4 pounds per month, or 2 pounds if you're being diligent about it. But there's just less goal. There's less accountability. Basically, like, when the goal is removed, it's so much more difficult to be adherent on dieting. But I want to bring it back to the point really quick. Someone has these dual goals, like, I want to be a powerlifter, I want to lose weight, I want to look good. How do you reconcile those things and get someone headed in the right direction?
I think for a lot of novices, and a lot of early trainees, they lose track of the fact that they can improve their body composition without dieting. Mm-hmm. You in the first probably 36 months of training, you can radically change the way your body looks with very little dietary manipulation. You can, if you're someone who is massively sedentary and you're 200 pounds overweight, take a 10-minute walk every day, and in 6 months, you're probably going to have lost a bunch of weight. And if you, essentially, it's like progressive overload it is progressive overload, right? With regards to body composition change. And eventually you can't go further with training and you start having to manipulate diet. And of course, if you manipulate both for the duration, it's going to work out better. But you certainly can take things in small chunks, small pieces to kind of make your way through a big journey. And the point being, dropping a weight class is not going to make you more successful. Competing, being strong, making progress, improving your body composition, all of which are possible without dropping a weight class, all of those things will make you successful. And, this, of course, doesn't apply if you're a first-time competitor, if you're just a freak athlete like Russ Orhe, for example, who came in and in his first meet, I think squatted like 600 pounds, right? Or at least the first meet where I saw him. And if you're that kind of athlete, and if you were 2 kilos overweight from the class where you can go and win nationals, cut to 2 kilos. But if you're just kind of a middle of the pack competitor competing to have fun, which is more of what this podcast is geared towards, or if you're not sure if you should compete, don't feel like you have to get past that. You can cut weight for future meets if you decide that you feel like you'll do better at that weight class. You're going to have probably a better time in every aspect of your training, both preparation and meet day, if you don't, though. And it's going to make it easier for you to accept getting into the competition emotionally. It's going to make it easier for you to succeed. And I think it's just going to end up with you having a better time. All right, so let's say that we're past the concept of weight classes. Let's say that you feel like, all right, it doesn't matter how strong I am. I want to compete. I want to compete because it looks like fun. And you get past the weight class thing. You're like, all right, Hanny, you convinced me. I guess I'll just stay in my current weight class and I won't diet to do this meet. Awesome. So why would I compete instead of just doing maxes in the gym, though? Why would I not just have a Saturday mock meet where I go into my 24-hour fitness and I load up the plates and I go and lift on the rack where I have to walk 10 steps backwards. I deadlift with hex plates and I bench press on a bench that's about 6 inches off the ground. Why would I opt to compete in a powerlifting meet instead of doing those things?
Let me throw a few things out there. It might be a similar reason why you don't get the same joy out of winning a local pickup game of basketball than you do about going in a rec league and taking things more seriously, or about being competitive in basketball, in college or something like that. It just it is a level of seriousness, and that kind of seriousness focuses your efforts on what you're trying to do. You also your lifts are held to a higher standard, so that your squats are to depth the same way they would be in competition. That all of your lifts are basically fundamentally sound, at least to the rules of powerlifting competition, and probably because it's just a lot of fun. There's something different about going to a competition and competing with other people cheering you on, about hearing your name called, about getting up there with other athletes, about sharing this experience outside of just your own experience with yourself, that is really rewarding.
Yeah, I would argue, first of all, that there is a type of person that all of this, like, they will definitely get a ton of joy and be happy just doing mock meets and getting stronger in the gym. But at the same time, when you go out there and actually get on the platform and just, you grab the bar when you're about to take the bar out of the combo rack, you're looking at the judges, like, it's just a completely different experience. And it's exciting in a very different way that I don't think you would ever get to experience just constantly maxing out in a gym. Sure, it's fun to max out, but it's even more fun when you know that there's something on the line, that you have to do it under a certain set of rules. Almost adding these certain limitations or circumstances just kind of make it more rewarding when you do actually go in and successfully complete a lift under a competitive standard.
For me, I think the camaraderie of the sport is what makes competing most enjoyable. I did my first powerlifting meet in 2011, and it was right before I was going to compete in bodybuilding. So I was pretty lean and hungry. But the competitive experience that I had in powerlifting was just so much more fun and rewarding than stepping on stage in a thong for a few hours.
Go figure.
Yeah, not surprising looking back on it.
If only we could powerlift in thongs, right? That would really be if that was the men's outfit, that would be a laugh.
No, but obviously everyone's nervous going into the first competition, but just the support that I had, with people rooting for me and everyone just kind of rooting for each other, just trying to see each other do well, regardless of whether you're competing against each other or not. I think that's one of the best parts of the sport. And it's kind of evolved for me to where I'm not really driven in a competitive sense. I get a lot of the camaraderie and the family things that Hanny mentioned earlier out of coaching and being a gym owner and being surrounded by that environment all the time. But I'm not really driven to compete personally. I really enjoy the practice of training. I love the feel of working hard and, pushing towards things, but I don't necessarily, I'm not necessarily driven to compete myself.
And that's fair, but you have done it up to this point, and no doubt you'll end up doing it again at some point in the future. And it's kind of a tale as old as time at this point that bodybuilders who get into powerlifting often don't go back. And I've heard of a few different people doing this, and obviously not all of them, right? Because you can think of a lot of bodybuilders who are really prolific prep coaches who get into powerlifting as an off-season pursuit, and they really enjoy it, and all of a sudden their off-season gets longer, but they end up going back because participating in the sport that they are advising people on and keeping up with modern tactics and things like that is important. But it's not uncommon that people who come from other barbell sports or other physique type sports end up in powerlifting. CrossFit tends to be a big funnel for both powerlifting and weightlifting. Bodybuilding has been a big funnel for powerlifting, and just general fitness has been a big funnel for powerlifting because it's very simple to pick up. The movements are not that complex. There are plenty of would-be young coaches on the internet who want to convince you that the power lifts are radically complex and you need to do all kinds of crazy things to do them successfully, but that's not the reality of things. The reality is that they are simple movements with maximum force exertion in one direction, and they are a lot of fun when you do them correctly. And it's extremely rewarding when you spend 6 months doing thousands of repetitions to kind of have something tangible to represent it. And that's kind of one of the big things that I think is what stands out to me for lifting on a platform as opposed to lifting in the gym, is that it's not about the trophy. It's not about the medal. You may or may not get a trophy or a medal. It's not about being a best lifter. It's about having a tangible, recordable, we could even call it certifiable opportunity to go and do your lifts under standards and rules that you are training to, and having 3 or at least 2 out of 3 of the people who are watching you, judging you, confirm that those lifts were good. And there's an added pressure with that, with regards to the rules, with regards to execution, and a lot of preparing people for those things is what we do as coaches, right? A large part of coaching, going beyond good programming, the nuance of coaching relates a lot to the mental aspects of it. But in terms of why you should compete, and again, this don't get me wrong, I have plenty of clients who don't want to compete. They have zero desire to, and that's fine. If you have absolutely no desire to compete, if you don't have time, if the finances are too much of a burden, whatever the reason may be, that's fine. And I don't mean to criticize anybody who chooses that. But for those of you that are on the fence, just do it. There are many reasons to do it, several of which we've gone over already. But there's a lot of value to it, including the fact that I think competing can help you to get stronger. And that's a point that I think is a little hard to understand. But in general, right, having direction in your training, going back to what Bryce was saying about dieting, right, being in a calorie deficit generally has a defined length and an end goal and an end date. And being in powerlifting prep is the same, right? There's a date for your competition. There's a period of time you're going to spend preparing for that competition. Your training is going to shift a little bit. I don't think meet prep training is as much different from off-season training as people want it to be. Or some coaches are they differentiate a lot, but it's not massively different, right? You could use an off-season program to get ready for a meet. It'd just be a little suboptimal. But the training generally is going to shift a little bit. And your focus is going to shift a little bit because you have something that you're working towards. You feel the pressure from that. And feeling that pressure, you're going to work harder. You're going to be more diligent. You're going to pay more attention to your warm-ups. Hopefully, you're going to pay more attention to your recovery and not drink too much beer. And there's a lot of reasons why it's going to drive you to do better over that 9, 12, or 16 weeks before that meet. So you take that and propagate that same idea over 2 meets a year, and all of a sudden 32 weeks of your training per calendar year are far harder working, far more directed, far more intentional than what you would be doing if it was just casual off-season training where skipping a session or having a bad night of sleep or not eating enough food, all of these things that you would just kind of wave off in the off season start to matter when you're in meet prep. And so your training quality, your recovery quality, they all tend to, or should be, but for the people who pay attention to them, they tend to be better when you're in that period prior to a meet. So by forcing yourself to have those periods and to have them reasonably often, you're just improving your training calendar year over calendar year. And it also kind of helps you to hold your progression markers to a certain standard, right? So if you compete 3 times a year and you use that as your evaluation of progress, you know that you're doing the same lift to the same standard every single time. And I think those are both important considerations. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, Henny, I would even say when you're somebody who's regularly competing, it even raises your off season if you're serious about it to a higher standard as well. I mean, there's no question about people always focusing more when they're actually preparing for a meet. But, I think that an experienced competitor, they know what they need to work on when they're not prepping for a meet, and it might not be the same level of focus, but it's definitely better for somebody who is competing to have an off season with defined goals. Like they're going to work towards those for sure because they know it will improve their competitive season when they come back to it.
Absolutely. So having some direction, basically, having something you're working towards enhances whatever you're doing. It's pretty straightforward in a principle that applies in most things, right? So if you have a diet, if you're dieting, you have a set date, you have a goal, it's easier to work towards that as opposed to just the goal of losing weight. Likewise, having a meet date and particular goals for that meet, it's easier than just thinking about, I want to get stronger in a general sense. And that applies in many things in life, work, hobbies, etc. There's a lot of ways that applies, and I think that in terms of competing in powerlifting, it can help make you stronger, literally more pounds on the bar by competing once or twice a year. But, for a lot of people, being too busy represents a problem. And a lot of people think, okay, well, I can only get into the gym for 3 days a week for an hour. How could I possibly do a meet prep? And, my inversion of that would be that meet prep doesn't have to be that much different from off-season training with the occasional exposure to a higher intensity single rep set. Would you guys say that you navigate that any differently?
Yeah, it doesn't take more effort to do a meet prep than it does to do normal powerlifting training. I've had athletes who, have been training normally for 4 days a week or something like that, which, if we're looking at the amount of time required to be a good powerlifter, it's really not that much compared to other sports. We're talking like 8 hours a week at most, whereas oftentimes that might represent 2 practices for another sport. But besides that, back to powerlifting, I've had athletes who go from 4 days a week to 3 days a week because they're in grad school, and we still manage meet preps just fine. So, it's absolutely doable. It's just a matter of whether you want to, and I don't think that should be a barrier for most athletes.
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases you can look at some of even the highest levels of the sport where there are people who you would never think would be able to become a strong powerlifter with all the emphasis out there on recovering and optimal nutrition and all that. Like if you look at Eli Burks, for example, like the guy it's like he never sleeps. He runs an ER, and I mean he just won IPF Worlds this past year. So you can definitely make it work. I think it's just more about setting up your own system that fits within your life and making sure that it doesn't add stress just because you're prepping for a meet. I have an athlete that just started clinical rotations for medical school, and before we had shorter sessions. He could be in the gym a lot more days of the week, but we shortened his training down to 3 days a week, and he only gets in on those days where he has enough time, and he's actually making arguably more progress right now. So it's just all about making sure that everything around your prep fits in with the rest of your life, and as long as you can do that, you can absolutely balance a meet prep.
And if you're not sure about how to alter your training, right? If you're thinking, man, I would love to do a meet. You guys have convinced me, but I don't know how to alter my training, and I only have 3 days a week to train because I'm an ER doctor. Get a coach. That's what coaches do. And if you go to a coach and they say, ooh, that's not enough time, find a different coach. There's a way to make it work. There's always a way to make it work. Unless you have 15 minutes to train 2 days a week, which, I would still take a swing at that just for the sport of it. But the fact of the matter is, if you can train 2 days a week for an hour, you can string something together. It wouldn't be ideal. You're not going to make the most progress by any means, but you can make it happen. So there's always a way. And if you don't have the knowledge to do it, seek out a professional that does, and you will be able to put yourself in a position to be successful. And if you're bottlenecked by finances, there's a lot of research you can do out there for free. There's so many resources out there. There's so many free programs out there. That's why we put our free programs out there, is because we want people to have access to high quality programming. And that being said, I think I'm gonna cut us off here. I think that this has actually been a really solid discussion on this subject, and we may revisit it at some point in the future in some capacity. One thing to note that I meant to say at the beginning of the show, but for those of you who are avid listeners, please do make it a point to go into the iTunes store and leave us a 5-star review. The more reviews we have, the more we get seen, the more the sponsors love us, and the more that we're motivated to make more episodes. We're on a really PR territory right now, 1 episode a year, and things are going great. And one more shout out to the sponsor of the Strength Athlete Podcast, SBD-USA. They have been great to us. That being said, checking out from here. Thanks for listening, and I hope you guys have an outstanding week.
See you guys.